I'm very pleased with that. Weber has had an enormous great influence in terms of thinking about heritage in Africa, but actually also a slightly unusual role in terms of making people outside Africa aware of it. You might not know that, but we are aware of what you say. And I was therefore extremely pleased that he would come here and would give us last keynote. So Weber has been doing different things over the years, but currently you're the director of the African World Heritage Fund, an associated fellow at the University of Cape Town. And he has also been project manager at ICROM in Rome. That's where he had those, part of the reason why he had this interesting relationship of understanding how it's being discussed at level from international to local. So I'm very pleased to introduce Weber to you and for us to listen carefully.
Yeah. Thank you for inviting me, and I'm very pleased to be here. I think I'll disappoint you in many ways, because a lot of the things which you have been discussing, I was going to mention them, but nonetheless, I'm still going to do that. Bear in mind that my presentation is, because of the work I do, is more to do with World Heritage Sites and how that comes in with the issues of sustainable development and issues like that. Let me do some propaganda thing first, and I hope you did collect the two pamphlets outside on the African World Heritage Fund. I just want to say that this is a fund created by two institutions, the Africa Union, and I know that most of you might not know about the Africa Union, but a lot of you know about the European Union. In Africa, we have the Africa Union, which may not be as effective as the European Union, but nonetheless exists. And apart from that, we are also what is referred to as a Category 2 UNESCO institution. What that means is simple. You do UNESCO work for no pay. That's the bottom line. But we have a specific mandate, and I've just put up the two main mandates of AWHF. The first one is to make the World Heritage List credible, representative, and balanced. I know some of you don't agree with it, but my job with the organization I deal with is to try and increase the number of World Heritage Sites from Africa. There are 1,007 World Heritage Sites in the world, 89 from Sub-Saharan Africa, 128 from 54 countries in Africa. So even for UNESCO in the world, they feel that that's not right. Something has to be done. The second objective of AWHF is in line with what you are discussing here, sustainable management and conservation of World Heritage Sites in Africa. And we are looking at sustainability in terms of their upkeep, but also what can you derive from them in terms of helping communities to have a life of their own. Of course, the last one is more internal, is as a new organization formed in 2006, we also want to consolidate our footprint. We are based in Johannesburg at the Development Bank of Southern Africa, and most of our funding, like the funding of the AU, comes from four main countries: Egypt, South Africa, Nigeria, and Algeria. Those are the countries which contribute more than 89% of the budget of the Africa Union. The others are 10 years in arrear, 20 years in arrear, and that's the nature of African governments. I hear a lot of people saying, it's very much top to down. That's Africa for you. You have to work with what you have, and you have to find ways of making it work. That's what I can say. I think this is the image of Africa for most people: tourism. wildlife, and things like that. This is the face of heritage in Africa. But there's also another side to it. This side, which recently we have witnessed with Ebola and issues like that. But one of the reasons why this organization was formed, the AWHF, was also to try and transform that image so that we can showcase the heritage and give a positive thing. I just want to start from here. I know most of you know that Africa is a continent, not a country. It sounds obvious, but even for me, at times I speak as if Africa is a country. When I work with UNESCO and ICROM, for example, they'll say this course has got so many participants from Africa. We have 3 from Africa, 2 from Germany, 2 from France, 1 from Japan. So we have many Africans. There are 3 Africans. What you forget is there are 54 countries in Africa. And when you have 3, there's nothing you are doing in terms of capacity building. I would also want to mention the fact that there's no African tradition, or at least that's how I believe, and no African culture. But there are African traditions and African cultures. We are not the same. From Sudan to the Cape, the difference is enormous. I still believe in the old thing which Ali Mazrui put up a few years ago, that there is what the influence of the triple heritage, Islam, Christianity, and traditional customs. It's aptly put by my friend from Nigeria, Adedayo, who says his family on Friday goes to the mosque. On Saturday, they go to the voodoo. On Sunday, they go to church. So when he dies, he's assured that something there exists. But you see that this influence also influences the heritage and so forth. It is also equally true that African knowledge, Chris was talking about traditional knowledge and things like that, but I'm just talking about African knowledge and practice, is seldomly profiled at a global stage. The recent Ebola crisis showed us that. The first crisis, what happened? Americans were parachuted to Sierra Leone, Guinea, and the other third country, Liberia, to go and try and solve the crisis of Ebola. Uganda, on the other hand, has been experiencing Ebola from time immemorial. Almost every 5 to 6 years, Ebola hits Uganda. They have already known how to deal with it. But our situation is that you don't look for solutions from Africa, you go elsewhere. I'm not saying that would have solved the problem, but I'm sure it will have alleviated a few headaches if that had happened. This workshop comes at a very good time. Last week we had a conference which we were discussing the new agenda. Again, I know some people have different views about the AU, but this is the new agenda which the AU has put across. This is the Agenda 2063, the Africa we want. And we were challenged as heritage managers to find a way of seeing how heritage can be incorporated into this. Yes, we can say maybe we're wasting our time, but I think if we are going to influence governments in Africa, you better start from the top. It doesn't normally work when you start from the bottom. That's a Western concept, which is very good, but we are not yet there. We start with the government. What is this Agenda 2063? Basically, it's supposed to transform the socio-economic situation in Africa and at least look forward to a prosperous continent which also has sort of development, and we have all the things which make up a modern continent. It has 7 what they call aspirations. First one, obviously, is a prosperous Africa, which also has good governance, democracy, human rights, and issues like that. At the moment, they don't exist, but the aspiration is that they will be there in the next 50 years. You also want to have development which is people-driven. In other words, again, change the whole concept of top to bottom and start at least something which is more useful. I think for us as heritage practitioners, I think we are almost catered in all the 7 aspirations of this of the Agenda 2063. One of the interesting things which were also challenged as heritage practitioners was how do we actually bring peace and secure a peaceful and secure Africa? Because in the next 10 years, the ambition is to silence the gangs in Africa. With conflict, there is no stability, there is no development. And this is one of the issues which we were supposed to discuss at this seminar. And as usual, we were talking to half those who were heritage practitioners, and I think we had about 30 heritage practitioners and academics and so forth, and we had 20 people from the private sector. As usual, the countries which were there, the first thing is you ask them, well, how are you going to contribute to this? The first thing is they complain. We are not being listened to. Governments are not giving us money. And we were saying, this is the platform. The AU has said, this is the platform. Now you are coming with a list of complaints. The private sector, on the other hand, were quick to say, maybe we should be doing this, maybe we should be doing that, maybe we should be doing this. What I'm trying to say also is that at times we tend to try and find faults rather than trying to come on board with solutions. Again, there are challenges in terms of implementing this Agenda 2063. Most of the Africans on the continent do not contribute meaningfully to the development discourse. It is something which is discussed by a few people who think that this has to be done, and perhaps this is one major challenge. I think the other challenge which has already come up in the past few days is the idea that we can only use economic indexes to try and measure development. There are other indexes which we might use, but I think it's a challenge for us as cultural practitioners to put figures to what we can do. How do we measure social cohesion, for example? How do we prove that this is the case? And again, I'll give you examples where the AU was saying, in actual fact, we can prove that cultural heritage is actually divisive. It actually creates problems. So how do you turn that round? Again, I mentioned the fact that most of if you look at the aspirations, aspiration 5 is probably directly linked to what we do. That is the issue of an Africa with a strong cultural identity, common heritage, shared values, and ethics. I'm not saying that we are not catered for in others, but this is the one which the conference or the workshop identified as one area where we could concentrate on and make sure that we actually, in the next 10 years, the contribution is significant. I think I'll go on. I think already Paul was mentioning the rapid growth of cities, especially in sub-Saharan Africa. And it has been said that industrialization is the primary driver of urbanism in Africa. Again, if you contrast this with Asia, you will find that there are differences in the way the cities are developing in Africa. In Asia, urbanization is coming up with the rise of the middle class. In Africa, it's not the case. This has a bearing on issues like tourism and issues like that. The income of the so-called middle class in Africa has been falling down. It's not going up. Again, the other issue is there's an assumption that Africa is moving away from farming, hunting, and so forth. The reality is that although you are taking these people from the rural area into the urban areas, basically the issue of hunting, not in the sense of hunting the animals, but in terms of informal sector, is what actually is happening. The shanty towns, I just gave you a picture here. I'm not saying it's a shanty town. This is Porto Novo, the capital of Benin. It's one of the fast growing cities. Is it a sustainable city? Those are questions which we can perhaps put across. Some people will argue that if it has been like this for the past 50 years, what is not sustainable about it? It is something which, is sustainable. I want to come back to the issue of dams, which we have been hearing in the morning. And these are some of the dams which the Agenda 2063 is trying to put across. This was also an impact. We talked about impact assessments and issues like that. Again, the AU was saying, these are the dams which are going to be built. What do you want us to do? The Inga Dam in DRC is going to be bigger than the, what is it called, the Chinese dam? The Three Gorges. This one, the Three Gorges is going to be dwarfed by this dam, right? So this is a big project, but where does heritage fit in? And I think Lugiake did put it quite nicely, that what do we do where there's poverty? This is a picture of Africa at night. And I'm sure a lot of us who have come from Africa, we are familiar with electricity shedding. I do not think there's a town or a city in Africa which is not experiencing that. If we don't have the dams, very soon we'll be going back to candles. If not, perhaps no lights at all. So how do we balance these projects with the aspirations which our continent requires? Obviously, infrastructural development alters the the landscape, and therefore erasing perhaps the archaeology which we so dearly love, but at the same time we have to make those choices. In 2015, in actual fact, this is on the lower end. I think it's more than 60% of the population will be in urban areas. They will also need food. There's need to make sure that that actually comes from the land. Of course, there's also the issue of climate change, which is a reality, which perhaps is also creating the poverty. But what are the immediate issues which Africa needs to look at? In my view, I think again, I'm going to go through this quickly because these are things which have already been said. I think in my view, heritage plays a critical role in a sustainable future. But in a sustainable today, I heard a lot of people talking about future generations. I think at times it becomes difficult to think of a future generation when I'm hungry today. I think culture should be able to provide food today so that I can then see the future generation. Otherwise, if I die today, there is no more generation which I can live. And this is important, that cultural heritage does contribute to livelihoods today and not tomorrow. This is something which, again, we talk about within the African World Heritage Fund with a lot of our stakeholders and so forth, that if you have a World Heritage Site, there must be some benefits for the government. Government must see what is in it for it, because they will put in the infrastructure, but they must also recover the tax. What about the local communities? What is in it? It cannot just be a site. And again, the private sector, this is an opportunity for investment and so forth. Again, I'm not going to talk about heritage. We have talked about heritage and the past, and whether heritage is just about the past or it's also about today, and whether destruction of monuments is a bad thing. For some cultures, perhaps it's a good thing. you revitalize and so forth. So we cannot fix it at one point. But the point I wanted to make is that even though there is destruction of heritage, the new developments are also creating heritage. We cannot ignore that probably in the next 50 years, Inga Dam could become a World Heritage Site. Although today we might see it as a difficult thing to accept. People create heritage every day. There was a discussion on Eritrea, I think, and that this is an Italian city and so forth. If you look at the World Heritage Sites cities from Africa, they are all colonial. We do not have, why do we not have Ibadan, one of the oldest towns on the list? It is because we always think of heritage as something in the past. Yes, heritage will be erased, but those are the choices we have to make. We have to make, heritage is about choices. It's not that we have to save everything. Each generation will choose a heritage which it is comfortable with, and they'll move on. There is no guarantee that in the next 50 years, the society then will be the same. Again, when you look at Africa, it's again difficult to generalize, but there are some practices, particularly with heritage, which seem to continue or perpetuate themselves. Even though most African countries are more than 50 years independent, you'll find that the heritage database is more or less the same as 50 years ago. And I'll come back to that. At the colonial time, heritage sites were looked at as scientific specimens. They had to be taken away from the people. I think this has again been said. And somebody talked about the idea was saving Africa from the Africans. This is why in Kruger, people had to be moved. Almost every park, World Heritage Site in Africa, people had to be moved because they were seen as to be a danger to the site itself. The heritage was not for them, it was for others. And this has continued even though Africa has been independent for a long time. I show this because even though this site is a recent site, the same idea of protected areas was actually practiced here. Remember, this was a vibrant prison with a large population of prisoners together with the guards and so forth. When it was declared a World Heritage Site, boom, everyone get out. We close it. What is the situation? It's now even difficult to sustain it because all these buildings which are empty need to be looked after, right? And you know, if you have tried to maintain an empty building, you know how difficult this is. So that practice somehow militates against sustainability. But it's not everywhere in Africa where they create what you might call protected areas or what I call zoos, where people can come and see. The French did not do that. The British did that in their colonies, but not the French. This is why in West Africa, particularly in the French countries, you'll find that villages like Kutamaku are World Heritage Sites. Ndukuyake, can you think of South Africa nominating a Zulu village to the World Heritage Site? I think there will be an outcry because we are not supposed to create heritage anyway, right? It is supposed to be in the past. So again, if we are going to be having sustainable heritage, then we need to be thinking in terms of the definition itself. Susan, Botswana, look at the number of sites which are on your national register. Archaeology dominates, and of course the historic buildings. Contrast it with Senegal, right? Architectural buildings, and there is religious buildings, right? And these, most of them are traditional religion sites. We try to look at Southern African states. It's very difficult to nominate as an African sacred site. It doesn't fit into the definition. What I'm just trying to say is that if it's going to be sustainable, then we need to think much wider than just looking at space. I'll give you another example very soon. But again, the issues are defining what is heritage and how it's going to be protected. Rather than just protecting a small section, you need to think widely. There are also issues of balancing conservation and development. This is something very important. Then there is the issue of conflict. How do the heritage sites, I've said, lead to peace? In most cases, as I will show, there has been conflict in heritage places. And of course, the issue is to develop, to include local communities. Thanks, somebody already talked about Kasubi Tomb, but I just want to point out one thing. The Kasubi Tomb in the 1970s was roofed with a tin roof. It did not have a thatched roof. Traditions, again, Chris talked about traditions, they change, right? But when World Heritage came, they said, no, it must have a roof. So we got some thatchers and thatch from South Africa and some thatchers from France, and they thatched this. The whole hullabaloo about the Buganda guys thatching it, yeah, they do. But who was behind it? Now that it has been bent, we are waiting for the Japanese to come and help us thatch it. So much about tradition. This is a site which I have written elsewhere, Dombo Shower, and again, the issues of definitions are awash. The archaeologists want the rock art to be conserved. They don't want the sacred forest to be part of it. They don't want the rainmaking ceremonies because they will affect the dating and so forth. So again, it's a question of if this thing is going to be sustainable, then we have to look at it from different angles, and perhaps the local communities must have a say rather than just us as scientists coming to say, no, rock art is important. We come from Rari at the University of Wits, and we are telling you this is important. Forget about everything else. Sorry, again, this is World Heritage. The major problems to World Heritage sites in Africa is development, and particularly issues related to mining and infrastructural development. It's a developing continent. What do you expect? If it doesn't develop, again, the outcry is governments are not doing anything to develop the continent. And we need to find a middle way to do that. Again, it's the same issues which I'm trying to... here is a map which we did a few years ago, which superimposes World Heritage over mining and oil exploration. And a lot of these sites are within something like 10 or so kilometers away from a World Heritage site, which means there is a danger unless if we talk to the private companies. And I'm happy that Ndugyake did mention this site. Again, I don't have to go into it, which is Mapungubwe. I was also drawn into the controversies of Mapungubwe. I think it was one of my first things. I was called to a meeting, and people were talking about how bad the coal mining was going to affect the site. But then the meeting was being sponsored by another mining company. Venetia, is it Venetia Mine? And I was like, we are saying we don't want mining, but we are being sponsored by, another mine. The contradictions at times don't help us. If we are going to say we don't want mining, there are no other mining companies which we are going to say, oh, this one sponsored my PhD at some point, therefore, well, I'm not going to criticize them. I don't think it works that way. Nubia, again, I'm not going to talk about it. Somebody has talked about it, except to say that if we do impact assessment and we salvage material, then do something about it. In the Nubian campaign, if you go to Sudan, to the museum today, those rescued monuments are dilapidating in the same way as they would have done if they'd been covered by water. But some people were paid to recover them, dump them at the museum, and we said we had done our job, which is not destruction here. I think it's the same. If we are going to say we are saving them, let's save them and make sure that it's seen that we have done that. Yes, conflict. Does it help in social cohesion? And the recent events in Mali indicate that sites become targets where there's a conflict because you want to inflict pain on the other side, right? It's the same thing in Nigeria, at Suka. Again, site destroyed because someone wants to inflict pain on the site. Again, this is Mali, and then this is DRC. The 5 World Heritage Sites in DRC have been affected. And the challenge which the AU put to us was, all the examples we are mentioning, it looks like there's conflict in all these World Heritage Sites. And yet you are saying, no, heritage helps in social cohesion. Demonstrate to us, how can you do that? And I think that's where we need to work hard and say, okay, here, it brings people together. So far, the examples have not really measured up. I want to talk about tourism because it was mentioned, and World Heritage Sites are supposed to contribute to sustainable development by bringing in tourism. And by the way, I think if you think of it, there isn't much tourism happening in Africa today, despite what we think. The numbers alone for the whole of Africa don't even come up closer to what China is having or what Japan is having. The numbers are very low. But how is tourism supposed to help? It is supposed to create, with the number of tourists coming, it is supposed to perhaps contribute to poverty alleviation, and this is supposed to be done through the selling of curios. And again, we had that site, Great Zimbabwe, with people selling the curios outside. I did a paper a few years ago which indicates that yes, there is a rise in the curios sale, but in actual fact, the agricultural output has gone down. It's easier to spend a day waiting on the road selling the curios than to be toiling in the field. So what is better here? We need to find solutions. This is a diagram which I've shown before. 95% of the money for tourists, from tourists, actually goes to tour operators, transport, accommodation, and food. And in Africa, where are these people located? In London, in Paris, and elsewhere, right? Yeah, maybe now South Africa is beginning to come in there. There is very little which goes to the heritage institution, let alone what comes to the local community. If they can get 1%, that's something. This is from one of the tourist statistics, that the international companies get about 72%. Government taxes about 10%. Local companies 13%. And a heritage place itself, I think, is about 2% and 3% for the local community. Despite the thousands of tourists which go to Kenya, Mombasa still has poverty. So what is happening there? I'm not saying that this project is working. We are trying. We did a study with DBS, a Development Bank of Southern Africa. We found out that all the 29 hotels and lodges in Victoria Falls and Livingstone imported their vegetables. From where? From Pretoria and Johannesburg. Vegetables, a tomato.
That's the same in Botswana.
Right. Now, what we also discovered was that the curio covers, they were not getting any money because there are so many of them, right? They're selling their products at a very cheap price. So we started a partnership with Standard Bank, South Africa, where we are encouraging, we have talked to about 7 hotels. We have agreed that they will buy the vegetables from these families on an experimental basis and see whether the products are okay. The Standard Bank gives them half a grant and half a loan. They have to repay the money. We are not working with a community. We are working with individual families rather than communities. We have seen that when you work with a community, it works when the donor funds are there. When you pull the donor funding, the thing is out. So we are trying to encourage families to do that. We hope it will work. It's still at a very experimental stage. It's a 5-year program. We started last year, and we'll see how it goes. I think we have more than 50 families already involved in this. I'm just going to quickly go through this. Again, another study which we did. It's not all sites which are going to benefit from tourism. Some sites is very difficult. Kilwa Kisiwani, which has a population of about 100,000, was nominated in 1981. Great Zimbabwe, the population is 25,000. Stegfontein, which is on the periphery or urban or peri-urban, approximately population is 15,000. And then Tweefontein in Namibia has 300 people. It's important, the population figures, because when you start looking at what are the job opportunities and things like that, you are in a better position to say, is this community benefiting or not? I think with Great Zimbabwe, we've already been told about that. In all these sites, except in Kilwa, there was participation by the private sector. In other words, private sector was investing in some of these sites in terms of hotels and things like that. Except for Kilwa, there was no such thing. But what we found was that Kilwa was the biggest recipient of donor aid. Somehow, it is lucky, people like it and they give money. Tweefontein, yes, was partly funded, but most of the funding was coming from private sector. Great Zimbabwe, funding from government because of the political situation. Nobody wants to give Zimbabwe money anymore. Cradle of Humankind, the money again came from government, but this was in the form of a loan so that they can create jobs and utilize the site. Now look at the numbers of people who are employed. Kilwa, there's no tourism going on there because I think, or one of the reasons is that it's not in the main tourism circuit of Tanzania. It's on the periphery. People go to Selu, Ngorongoro, and places like that. Kilwa, even though has been investment in infrastructure and things like that, is not attracting anybody. So those are the numbers. I think the one which was doing well was Cradle of Humankind. More than 5,000 jobs created. That's directly related to the site itself. New facilities, infrastructure developed. But remember, this is a loan, right? What does this mean? It means maybe government intervention does not necessarily lead to better yields in terms of jobs and things like that. But if there is an investment which is linked to returning the money, it looks like then it works. Again, I'm coming back to heritage, that it's an important asset, but more importantly, is an expression of local pride, not just about the past, but also we need to engage the communities themselves for us to do that. And in most places in Africa, what you find is that where they've been allowed to stay, the local community has been allowed to stay, the sites have not been destroyed. They still are there. Ethiopia is one good example. Not Eritrea in this case, but at least quite a lot of the sites where the local community is there. The place is not an archaeological specimen. It is a working place. It is a place for worship. It's also somebody's grazing area. You can't say, this is now a World Heritage Site, you can't graze your cattle here. And yet they've been doing that for many years. I think you need to find a way of how you can continue with that. There are many challenges in Africa, particularly in terms of institutional capacities. even though we might want to get involved in development, you find that most organizations, they don't even have the capacity to look after the heritage itself. So there are challenges, but then we need to find ways of doing that. So in short, what we then said to the AU was that, yes, we understand that Africa needs new infrastructure so that it achieves its goals of being prosperous, but heritage has got to play an important part. In actual fact, we think that heritage should be the cornerstone of that sustainable development on the continent, because with proud citizens, at least they have the confidence to go forward. At least the other thing which we thought was important is to make sure that we provide, heritage should provide a platform to create a dialogue, particularly between governments, developers, and communities. Governments don't understand us as heritage professionals. Developers don't understand us. Communities don't understand us. Who is to blame? I don't think it's the three of them. It is us who have to go out and state our case so that they begin to see that there is an advantage in what we are doing and that there are benefits in what we are doing. I want to end by quoting Nelson Mandela, who said, "It always seems impossible until it's done." Thank you.